What's up? I'm Jimfro, and this is the Ready Check Pull Boss Guide to Lumathar on Normal and Heroic. Big thank you to our supporters on Patreon. We've completely overhauled our Patreon exclusive content this tier with early access, extended heroic walkthroughs, and a bunch more. Lumathar is the second boss of the raid according to the Dungeon Journal, but the boss order is really a choose your own adventure after the first boss. So Lumathar is a cute little moth-looking boss that has two phases, a short intermission, and is full single target, and you'll want a bloodlust during the intermission. On Heroic, before you pull, split the raid into two equal groups for phase 2 soaks. Alright, so you'll start by tanking the boss right where it's at and have the raid spread out around the front half of the room. The tanks have a pretty simple taunt swap after every piercing strand frontal cast. Just try not to take two in a row and face it away from the raid. On Heroic, the frontal is used to break some of the tangles, which I'll talk more about in a bit. The next mechanic happens when a few players get sucked in and tethered to the boss. They need to run away from the boss to break the tether. The tether does ramping damage that quickly becomes unhealable, so you need to break it as fast as possible. During testing, it was pretty hard to tell when you were tethered, so I'll link a weak aura pack below just in case Blizzard doesn't end up updating the visual. Once the tether is broken, a pool drops under those players that's really bad to stand in. So you'll want to make sure to drop the pools away from the entrance while keeping the entrance clear for the next two mechanics. First of which is lair weaving, which is a giant ring that slowly gets smaller over time. Passing through it would do a ton of damage and root you in place for a while. This gets worse because the second mechanic over Infusion Burst is a giant swirly that fills up most of the room, does ticking damage to everyone for a few seconds, and then basically one-shots anyone that gets hit by it when it explodes. The way that you avoid all of this is by single targeting one of the tangles and blasting it down as fast as possible, creating a path for you to get through. This is why we're recommending keeping the entrance clear of any pools so that you always know which tangles you'll be DPSing and where it'll be safe to stand. On Heroic, the tangles are actually immune and can only be broken by the tank frontal. So the tanks need to make sure they know which tangle everyone will be DPSing, hit that one with a frontal, and then quickly taunt swap the next frontal away from that spot so no one gets ookered in the duker. And you pretty much keep doing that until the intermission at 50% when the boss rips its body out of its butt, does no mechanics for a few seconds, and starts leaking moth fluid onto the middle of the floor that does a bunch of damage if you step in it. The boss also takes 25% increased damage for the rest of the fight, so this is where you'll want a bloodlust. After that, the boss will now be movable, which starts phase 2. The boss now does Arcane Outage, which is a big arcane explosion that blasts the raid for several ticks of raid damage, and more importantly, drops some more moth juice underneath itself. This means that you'll be dragging the boss around the outer part of the circle, and the goal now is to kill the boss before you run out of room. But that's not all. The tank frontal is now a frontal cone that needs to be group soaked since it now does a bunch of initial damage and has a ticking dot, both of which get reduced by the amount of players getting hit by it. On Heroic, you'll need to split the raid into two groups because the frontal leaves a dot on you once you've soaked, stopping you from soaking a second time. For healers, make sure you have a cooldown ready for every arcane outage because that does massive raid damage. And that's pretty much it. Here's a quick recap for you to review or screenshot for later. You can find all of our recaps over at the Ready Check Pull Discord. Big thank you to our supporters on Patreon. We've got a ton of Patreon exclusive content coming out this tier, like early access, extended heroic walkthroughs, and a bunch more. So check out the Discord and Patreon links below. Peace.